This is Nightly Business Report with Bill Griffith and Sue Herrera.
Staying the course, the Federal Reserve hints at more rate hikes ahead, contributing to another volatile day on Wall Street.
Toy Story. Some of the world's largest retailers are now making a play this holiday season for the $11 billion hole left by Toys R Us.
Are you feeling lucky? Well, there's more than $1 billion up for grabs this week as lottery fever grips the nation. Those stories and much more tonight on Nightly Business Report for Wednesday, October 17th.
And we do bid you good evening, everybody, and welcome. It was the sell-off that wasn't. When the opening bell rang this morning, stocks fell sharply, and just like that, half of yesterday's gains were erased. However, the intense selling did not last. Stocks started to climb back, and even after the release of those minutes from the recent hawkish Federal Reserve meeting, stocks held steady. So after some bouncing around, here's where things settled out for this day. At least the industrial average fell by 91 points. We're now at 25,706. It had been down more than 300 points at one time today. NASDAQ fell by just 2 points. The S&P was off a fraction.
Hundreds of companies in the S&P 500 have not been participating in this bull market. Take a look at this. There are 239 stocks that are down 20% or more from their all-time closing highs. 159 are down at least 30% from all-time highs. 107 down at least 40% from their highs, and 66 are down at least 50% from their highs. Well, with fewer stocks taking the major indexes to record highs, what is this signaling about the markets? Joining us to talk about that is Mike Gibbs, Managing Director of Equity Portfolio Strategy at Raymond James. Welcome, Mike. I mean, on the surface of those statistics that I just kind of rattled off, it doesn't sound like it's all that positive.
No, you're right. You sometimes need to look beneath the surface of the market just to see how strong the market is. I don't think the average investor understands the fact that the S&P 500 can fool them from time to time. In the S&P 500, 50 stocks make up 52% of the daily price move. So that's why it's so important to monitor the data that you highlight, and that's to get a pulse of really what's happening in the stock market, and that's what's happening with the average stock that's out there. So I think it's important to monitor that because of what we're seeing today.
But here's what the point we're getting to. As a market rallies, the more stocks you have participating, the more sustainable that rally is. But when you have fewer and fewer stocks participating as the market continues higher, which is what these numbers suggest, eventually that rally peters out. Do you agree or not?
No, I do agree. Yeah. And it's a gauge that we monitor from our strategy area. And I'll highlight, for instance, if you go back and look in 2014 and 2015, we saw something happen in the small cap stocks. The index was just barely off its high. But you're seeing a huge percentage of stocks down 20% or more. And eventually that index went through a pretty substantial decline before it found its bottom in 2016. So that's why it is so very important to monitor what's going on. And what we're seeing today is something that we pay attention to, but I do caution you that it's not wise to focus on one indicator alone. Yeah. And you must focus on the entire array of indicators. And we do think the fact that the economy is strong, earnings continue to be strong. We continue to be bullish on this market and would buy the pullback. Now, we are paying attention to the data you highlight, and if this market stabilizes and runs to a new high, which we think it can do over the next 12 months, if the percentage of stocks that are down 20% or more remains at a very high level, it could signal we could have problems down the road.
Well, but you kind of answered my next question, which is to make it actionable for our viewers. If you have fewer stocks participating in the upsurge of the market, as a long-term investor, what do? You mentioned that you would buy the dip, but you know, for the average investor out there, what should they be doing?
Yeah, no, I agree. It's a great point. So, and the average investor should not be overly consumed with some of this data that we're throwing out there. They should be aware of it. And if they're working with an advisor, you know, most of the advisors are looking at this data in conjunction with others, which is what I mentioned before. And, you know, caution in focusing on one data point. So the investors should be aware of this. The investors should look at their total portfolio. The investors should assess what's happening in the overall economy and with the earnings stream of the stock market, because that's what makes it go higher. Yeah. And if it continues to be strong, which it is today, then I think what we're seeing as far as underneath the surface will correct itself and will fix itself.
All right, Mike Gibbs, thank you very much. Mike is with Raymond James. Bill?
Thanks.
Elsewhere, the Federal Reserve, as we've been reporting, has been the target of growing criticism by the president over the pace of its recent interest rate increases. But the minutes of the Fed's last meeting, which were released today, show that policymakers intend to stay the course. Steve Leisman reports tonight for us from the Federal Reserve in Washington.
When Fed officials raised rates in September by a quarter point, minutes to their meeting showed they judged they'd have more rate hike work to do in the months ahead. The minutes showed that most voters at the Federal Open Market Committee, or FOMC, meeting said further rate hikes would be needed even after hiking rates to the 2 to 2.25% range in September. What's more, a number of them felt they might eventually have to act to slow the economy. That is, levy a, quote, modestly restrictive rate in order to slow the economy down and reduce the risk of overheating or overshooting on their 2% inflation target. Behind all this were fairly optimistic views on the economy. FOMC members saw strong growth. Some even saw stronger growth than they'd anticipated, along with low unemployment. They said part of that strength came from the effects of fiscal stimulus. But some saw the effects of the stimulus wearing off in coming years, and there was concern about the trade disputes along with weaker overseas growth. There's also worries that the financial troubles in some emerging markets could spread to other countries. Overall, Fed officials, though, saw the risks as balanced to the economy and said on the upside, maybe that fiscal stimulus would work out better than they forecast. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Steve Leisman in Washington.
Home building activity dropped more than expected in September, adding to a string of weaker reads on the housing market. Housing starts fell more than 5% last month. The biggest decline was seen in the South, which accounts for the bulk of home building. Separately, total mortgage application volume fell about 7% in the most recent week as rates rose to a near 8-year high. Housing stocks were all lower in today's session.
Well, when it comes to a possible trade deal with China, President Trump says that the two countries are just not yet ready to start talking again. And that sentiment was echoed today by the Commerce Secretary.
I don't know that I'd call it a continued impasse. We are where we are, and in any negotiation, there are ups and downs, there are hiatuses, and there are much more active periods. So it appears as though we may be in something of a hiatus now.
And by the way, late today, the Treasury Department declined to label China a currency manipulator. That's a title that has been threatened but not used since 1994. The report released today says that no major trading partner met the criteria to be designated as intentionally manipulating its currency. But China was put on a watch list along with a number of other countries.
Farmers across this country are feeling the impact of the trade war with China. Soybeans in particular have seen prices plummet, and now there's a glut of grain on the market. Elon Mui is in Frankfort, Indiana.
Harvest is in full swing here on Mike Beard's farm. He's expecting a big haul this year, and he's not alone. Here in Frankfort and across the heartland, farmers are producing more soybeans than ever before. Over 4.5 billion bushels are expected this year.
I thought we had a pretty good crop in the ground and it was growing well.
In fact, soybean production is expected to hit a record high, just as demand drops off because of the trade war. Soybeans are the country's top agricultural export, totaling $22 billion last year. That's more than double the amount of corn exports. And China is the biggest foreign buyer. But over the summer, it hit the industry with a 25% tariff. Now Beard is facing a glut of grain.
Best case scenario now would be that we have profitable talk with China, put this tariff retaliation on our soybeans behind us.
Here at the Kokomo Grain Company, the silos are filling up fast with all that extra supply. Not only soybeans, but also corn. That got hit with the Chinese tariff too.
Farmers who have available storage are storing more, especially soybeans this year, than they typically would.
To make room, Kokomo cleaned out an unused building, leased extra space, and moved 2 million bushels of corn under this tarp.
We have gone to extraordinary means to come up with more space to be able to handle this year's crop.
Farmers typically have to store at least part of their harvest, but stockpiles are at an all-time high. About an hour away from Kokomo, Brent Bible has 90,000 bushels of soybeans stored on his farm.
It's tough to get everything in, and it's elevators are running out of room, terminals are running out of room.
If all goes well, the silos could be cleared out by spring, and farmers could still turn a profit by selling lots of grain, even if it's at a lower price. The government has also promised up to $12 billion in aid. But if the trade war goes on much longer, Beard fears Chinese demand for U.S. soybeans could disappear for good.
Personally, I think we've lost a share, but there are opportunities here. There are other places that on this earth that consume soybeans and corn, and we need to investigate and work with those people that are a potential market for us.
On the farm, hope springs eternal. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Ilan Mui in Frankfort, Indiana.
Well, the U.S. is once again the world's most competitive economy. This is the first time the U.S. has reached the top spot on that list in a decade. The World Economic Forum compiles this listing of countries based on things like workforce diversity, press freedom, labor rights, and disruptive businesses. Singapore came in number 2. Germany rounded out the top 3.
It's time to take a look at some of today's upgrades and downgrades. Home Depot and Lowe's were downgraded to neutral from outperform at Credit Suisse. The analyst is concerned that home prices will moderate as higher interest rates weigh on affordability. The firm's price target on Home Depot is $204. The price target on Lowe's is $111. Home Depot shares fell 4%. Lowe's was off 3%. Netflix was downgraded to sector weight from overweight at KeyBank 1 day after its blowout earnings. The analyst cites the need for stronger revenue growth, not just subscriber growth. The price target is $377, and on the back of its quarterly report, the stock was higher by 5% to $364.70. American Airlines, Delta, and United Continental were all upgraded to buy from hold at Deutsche Bank. The analyst cites the carrier's ability to manage fuel costs. The firm also noted strong passenger demand in the U.S. and the transatlantic markets. Shares of American, Delta, and United were all higher.
Still ahead, why the U.S. is watching the green rush in Canada. Employees at U.S. Steel are set to get their biggest pay raise in years, 14% over a 4-year period. All the result of a new deal just negotiated with the company. Now, some also say it's because of the White House's clampdown on steel imports, which have helped to lift steel prices here in the U.S. The agreement still needs to be ratified by the company's 16,000 workers around the country.
Canada today became only the second country in the world to legalize recreational marijuana. But the closely watched move north of the border failed to inspire investors. Pot stocks like Kronos, Tilray, Canopy Growth, and Aurora Cannabis all sold off in trading today. Deidre Bosa is in St. John's, Newfoundland tonight.
As the clock struck midnight here in St. John's, Newfoundland, history was made. Recreational marijuana became legal in Canada. All day, starting on the East Coast and moving west with the sun, similar scenes of celebrations played out as Prime Minister Justin Trudeau makes good on his 2015 campaign promise. The first sale went to Newfoundland local Ian Power, who said it's been his dream to be the first person to buy the first legal gram of cannabis in Canada.
I never thought it'd be legal, not once. And then when the ball started rolling about 10 years ago, I ramped up my efforts to help people get medical marijuana. I'm happy for all cannabis users all across the country. It's not just about me, it's about people wanting to have, a safe recreational pastime and for medical research for cannabis in the future.
Other countries that are moving slower toward easing marijuana laws, like the U.S., are watching the rollout closely. Bruce Linton, CEO of Canopy Growth, Canada's largest pot company, says that regulators from Europe to South America are using Canadian regulations as a blueprint.
What they're saying is Canada has the best set of rules. We're going to take them and maybe turn them into a Portuguese language or German. And so the platform is understood as the best. Canopy is sort of the leader in that, and now what we have is this global thing happening at an unbelievable rate.
Right. This store has already sold tens of thousands of dollars worth of legal pot on day one, but that's just a drop in the bucket in what's expected to be a $5 billion industry by 2020.
That could prove lucrative for the Canadian government and the country's private sector. Losers could be players in the American cannabis industry, where marijuana remains federally illegal. But there are still many unknowns for Canada's now legal market, from the enforcement of regulations to supply shortages and online sales and delivery. Canada will have to contend with these questions on a global stage as its grand cannabis experiment plays out. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Deirdre Boza, St. John's, Canada.
A food fight at Campbell's Soup, and that's where we begin tonight's Market Focus. The company's heirs, who are members of the Dorans family, are taking a stand against activist investor Third Point. Third Point's CEO Dan Loeb had been pushing to oust all 12 members of Campbell's board of directors during its November meeting. He has also called for the sale of the company. Third Point, though, said it's not surprised by the Dorans family's resistance to all of that. Stock fell 5% today to $36.32. Casino mogul Tillman Fertitta has reportedly approached Caesars Entertainment about a possible merger. It is unclear whether Caesars will entertain such an offer. Fertitta already owns the Golden Nugget. Speculation, though, sent shares of Caesars much higher, up 12% today to $10.20. And Winnebago's revenues exceeded $2 billion for the first time in the company's history last quarter. The results released today were better than expected, thanks to strong demand for some of its products. But on its conference call, the CEO did tell analysts that it is facing some higher material and labor costs.
The cost impact of the tariffs on the RV and marine industries have been real, and in some cases are ongoing, with the new rounds of tariffs imposed against China really just now beginning to impact our financials.
Winnebago's stock gained 4.5% today to $33.20.
Prudential is no longer considered systemically important. The government removed the label, freeing the insurance company from more rigorous oversight by the Federal Reserve. Prudential says it is pleased with that decision. The stock was up almost 2% to $99.70. General Electric reportedly beat out Siemens to land an Iraq power contract. According to the Financial Times, the deal to supply power to that country is worth about $15 billion. The stock rose 9 cents to $12.19. And the aluminum producer Alcoa reported better than expected earnings thanks to a rise in the price of the metal. The company also announced a share repurchase of $200 million. The stock rose in initial after-hours trading, extending gains from the regular session.
During its last full year in business, back in 2016, Toys R Us brought in $11 billion in revenue. Now that the toy icon is gone, a slew of big players are vying to get a piece of those sales. Target and Walmart are just two of the many familiar names that have recently announced plans to expand their in-store and online toy offerings. Joining us tonight to kind of handicap which companies may win, may lose as they try to win this category, Linda Bolton-Weiser is Senior Research Analyst with D.A. Davidson, covering consumer product companies. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
There's a real scramble going on, isn't there, right now?
Yes, absolutely. It's about 15% share of the U.S. toy retail market that's up for grabs, and all the big retailers are making plans to try to grab some of that share. So Walmart, Target, and Amazon all have special initiatives that they've announced to put more emphasis on the toy category.
So they each have different plans or initiatives, as you mentioned, to grab market share. Which one do you think might be the most effective, and how are they going to fare against Amazon?
Well, I think each one of them is going to be able to, gain their fair share. Walmart in particular is stepping up and trying to be more of an experiential type of retailer the way Toys R Us was. So they're having a lot of in-store events for kids and their parents leading up to the holiday time period. Amazon reportedly is going to have a special toy catalog and distribute it at Whole Foods markets. And Target has an expanded, hot toy list and expanded number of SKUs that they're going to be carrying for the holidays. So they all have their plans in place.
There is a thought, though, when Toys R Us went under, that maybe some of that market share just disappeared and won't come back. In other words, we won't see all of those sales that Toys R Us used to enjoy going to any of those new competitors. What do you think?
Well, no, I think that, you know, the demand for toys is what it is, and in the United States right now, the toy retail market is growing quite healthily in the mid-single digits. So consumers will demand the toys and purchase them regardless of how many outlets are actually out there selling the toys. So I do think that, that the market, once we get past this transition period, will remain very healthy.
All right, that's the retail side of it. What about the companies that are producing these toys? Who's best positioned, do you think, for this upcoming holiday season between the Hasbros and the Mattels and the like?
Well, you know, the larger companies with some of the power brands like Nerf and Barbie and Hot Wheels, those are some of the product lines that are going to be featured by the top retailers this holiday. So I think really the larger toy companies can benefit. Some of the smaller toy companies that relied on Toys R Us to distribute and sell their products, those are the ones that might suffer here. And some of those, quite frankly, won't survive.
Well, it's going to be a very interesting holiday shopping season. We'll see how it plays out. Linda Bolton-Weiser with D.A. Davidson, thanks again for joining us tonight.
You're welcome.
Coming up, an industry that is taking off.
Business jets are once again in demand. Why is the industry soaring to new heights? I'm Phil LeBeau. That story coming up on Nightly Business Report.
One industry that is surging in the economy right now, corporate jets. In fact, the business jet business is finally getting a lift after a decade of trying to clear out the problems caused by the Great Recession of the past decade. Industry leaders recently met in Orlando, Florida, and that's where we find Phil LeBeau tonight.
They are big, high-priced, and very much in demand. Corporate jets, from small ones selling for a few $1,000,000 to the big boys going for tens of millions. They are once again hot sellers.
Clearly, the global economy is very strong right now, particularly the U.S., and business aviation tends to follow the economy. So this is a particularly good time that we're seeing for the aviation industry.
After business jet sales lost altitude a decade ago, the recovery has been slow, mainly because a glut of used planes held down demand for new ones. That's no longer the case. Embraer's new Praetor 600 jet is attracting heavy interest.
We've already have sales for the Praetor 600, the Praetor 500, so we're starting to see the momentum for our customers, not only our existing customers, but new customers coming to the brand, especially corporate flight departments.
The corporate tax cut and deregulation under the Trump administration have also convinced more companies it's time to get a new jet. The latest models can fly further with more connectivity and features, attracting a wider array of buyers.
It's been individual buyers, it's been private companies, small companies, large companies. I think everybody's benefiting from that, and I think you'll see that over the next couple of years.
Historically, this is a boom and bust industry, with jet makers overbuilding in the good years. But this time, industry leaders believe it will be different, confident they can keep the business jet business soaring for years to come. Phil LeBeau, Nightly Business Report, Orlando, Florida.
And a private jet could be yours if you win the Mega Millions jackpot, now the second biggest in U.S. lottery history. Now combine that with Powerball, and the total payout could exceed $1 billion this week. That is, of course, if somebody wins. Frank Holland is in Tenafly, New Jersey, where lottery fever is running hot.
More than 1 billion reasons to play the lottery.
Each one of these tickets could potentially change my life.
Gary Horvath is playing to win and hoping to hit it big.
I try to tell people someone's going to win the lottery. Why not me?
All around the country, people are playing Mega Millions and Powerball.
$50 even for the lotto. Sounds good.
Michael Palmer picking 6 numbers and hoping for one of the 9-digit jackpots.
You have to give yourself the opportunity to win.
The Powerball drawing for $345 million on Wednesday night. Mega Millions is on Friday. It now has a $900 million jackpot with the potential to grow to $1 billion.
With the pot being as big as it is, you obviously want to give yourself a chance, maybe multiple chances, depending on how much money you got in your pocket.
Thank you. Good luck, sir. Thank you. Sir.
These days, your chances of winning big money are actually slimmer. Both the Mega Millions and the Powerball, they changed their formulas to increase jackpots and attract more players, but that comes with longer odds.
Random. Just random numbers.
That's Stacey Bailey's strategy. Lottery officials say about 90% of the big winners do it the same way.
It's going to take a long time to figure out what to do with that kind of cash once you have it, right?
Larry Kadish says he's playing for fun with his coworkers.
What are the plans if you actually win?
Depends on how much we win. I just won $8. Can't leave your job over that, right?
Definitely not. That's the upside of the new formulas, more winners for smaller prizes. But most lottery players have the same big dreams. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Frank Holland in Tenafly, New Jersey.
And finally tonight, a familiar face or bird is retiring. The puppeteer who has played Big Bird on Sesame Street is retiring after 50 years. Carol Spinney tells the New York Times his last day is tomorrow. The 84-year-old also played the role of Oscar the Grouch. Spinney has been praised for his genius and his talent and his ability to breathe life into two of Sesame Street's most popular puppets. Good for him. We wish him well.
Indeed. Here's a look at the day on Wall Street. The Dow fell 91 points. It had been down more than 300. NASDAQ down 2. S&P off a fraction. And that does it for us tonight. I'm Sue Herrera. Thanks for joining us.
I'm Bill Griffith. We'll see you tomorrow.
Good luck in the lottery.
Yes.